The flash of paparazzi bulbs was a drug, and Ethan Whittaker was hopelessly addicted. Standing under the gilded arches of the Grand Palais in Paris, his arm wrapped possessively around the waist of a woman who was not his wife, he felt invincible. The air, thick with expensive perfume and ambition, was his to breathe. He was a king in a foreign court, his mistress, Sierra Blake, the glittering jewel on his arm. He had told his pregnant wife, Amelia Davenport, he was on a solo business retreat in Geneva, a necessary evil to close a deal. He had no idea the deal was a lie. The retreat was a fiction, and the woman he'd left behind in their quiet New York brownstone wasn't just waiting for him. She was waiting for the perfect moment to detonate the gilded, beautiful bomb she had built right under his feet. Ethan Whittaker didn't just walk into a room. He conquered it. At 38, he was the architect of his own universe, the CEO and founder of Whittaker Analytics, a data mining behemoth that had made him a billionaire before his 35th birthday. He was a man forged in the crucible of Wall Street ambition and Silicon Valley disruption, and he wore his success like a bespoke suit, perfectly tailored, intimidating, and unapologetically expensive. His life was a curated collection of victories, the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the fleet of cars gleaming in his climate-controlled garage, and the wife who was by all accounts his greatest acquisition. Amelia Davenport was not like the other women in their circle. She wasn't a socialite who laundered her calendar through philanthropy, who chaired committees for clout, or a former model clinging to the vestiges of her youth. She was quiet. Inherited wealth from the Davenport textile dynasty gave her a grace and security that new money like Ethan's could only emulate, never truly possess. She moved with understated elegance, her intelligence a gentle, steady light rather than a blinding glare. Ethan had loved that about her. It was a perfect contrast to his own abrasive brilliance. She was his sanctuary, the calm port in his relentless storm of ambition. But lately, the sanctuary had started to feel like a museum. Their conversations, once vibrant and challenging, had dwindled to domestic logistics. Her pregnancy, now in its 5th month, should have been a source of shared joy. Instead, for Ethan, it had become another box ticked on the checklist of a successful life. It also made Amelia tired, more withdrawn. She had given up her position as a senior curator at the Met to focus on her health, and Ethan saw it as a retreat into a world he couldn't monetize or dominate. "What did you do today, darling?" he'd ask, loosening his tie as he strode into their cavernous home. "I was researching Renaissance weaving techniques," she might reply, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop. "It's fascinating how they used sumac and indigo to create—" "Fantastic," Ethan would cut in, already pouring himself a Macallan 25. "Marcus Ellison is trying to poach my head of AI. Can you believe the audacity?" Her world of art, history, and culture had become, in his mind, a series of quaint, unlucrative hobbies. She was nesting. It was natural, he told himself. But it was also boring. And Ethan Whittaker hated being bored. Sierra Blake was the antidote to boredom. At 24, she was a supernova of ambition, an Instagram influencer whose currency was sculpted abs, strategically worn bikinis, and an unquenchable thirst for the limelight. Ethan had met her at a tech conference in Miami. She hadn't been a speaker. She'd been hired to add atmosphere at the VIP after-party. She approached him, not with the deference he was used to, but with a bold, appraising look. She didn't care about his data algorithms. She cared about the gravitational pull of his wealth. Their affair was a shot of adrenaline. Clandestine dinners at restaurants, so new they hadn't been reviewed yet. Expensive gifts, a Cartier bracelet here, a private jet to a Caribbean weekend there. It was the thrill of the illicit, The ego boost of being desired by a woman half his age who represented the vibrant, vapid, intoxicating pulse of modern celebrity. Sierra was everything Amelia wasn't. Loud, demanding, and utterly transactional. With her, he wasn't a husband. He was a benefactor. A king. "Paris Fashion Week is coming up," Sierra purred one evening, scrolling through her phone as they lay in the silk sheets of a boutique hotel suite he kept for just these occasions. "The Auray show is the one to get into. It's impossible. Everyone is dying to see what Adrian Cole does next." Ethan had never heard of Auray or its designer. "Consider it done," he'd said, the challenge invigorating him. Pulling strings was his favorite pastime. A few calls to his PR firm, a charitable donation to the right cultural fund, and 2 front-row tickets were secured. It was a demonstration of his power, a gift he could lay at her feet. "I can't believe it, Ethan," she shrieked, wrapping her arms around his neck. "We're going to be front row. Me, at Auray." "I have to be in Geneva for a few days," he told Amelia that night, carefully avoiding her gaze as he packed a suitcase. "Finalizing the merger with the Swiss data firm. It's unavoidable." Amelia looked up from her book, her expression placid. A small, knowing sadness flickered in her eyes, a look he had become adept at ignoring. "Of course, Ethan. Work comes first. Will it be long?" 3-4 days at most, he said, the lie slipping out with practiced ease. "I'll be back before you know it. You just rest. Take care of yourself and our little one." He placed a perfunctory kiss on her forehead, the scent of her lavender and chamomile soap, a stark contrast to the heady amber perfume that clung to him from his afternoon with Sierra. He felt a pang of something. Guilt, maybe, or a faint echo of the man he used to be. But he pushed it down. Geneva was the story. Paris was the reality, and reality was far more exciting. After he left, the silence of the brownstone settled around Amelia. For a moment, she allowed her placid mask to fall. Her hand went to her gently swelling stomach, a gesture both protective and resolute. She picked up her phone, not to track his flight to Geneva, but to open a secure messaging app. A new message popped up from a contact named AC. "The final fitting was a success. The collection is breathtaking. Are you ready for this?" Amelia's fingers flew across the screen, her response swift and certain. "He just left. He thinks he's going to Geneva. He has no idea he's flying straight into our theater. I was born ready, Adrian." She closed the app and opened another. This one, a banking portal. She scrolled to a line item from 6 months ago. A wire transfer of $8 million, routed through a series of shell corporations before landing in the accounts of a struggling visionary but nearly bankrupt Parisian fashion house. The recipient, Maison Auray. Amelia Davenport, the quiet, pregnant wife with her quaint hobbies, closed her laptop. She had her own trip to prepare for, and unlike her husband, she had no reason to lie about her destination. She was going to Paris to check on her investment. The private jet descended through the Parisian clouds like a silver dart. Below, the city sprawled out in a tapestry of slate-grey roofs and shimmering lights. Sierra pressed her face to the window, capturing the descent for her 2 million Instagram followers. The caption was already drafted in her head. "Touchdown in the city of love with my mystery man. PFWW jet set life. Blessed." The mystery man conceit was Ethan's rule, a thin veil of discretion he insisted upon. It only added to her allure, she reasoned, making her followers speculate wildly. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," she breathed, turning to Ethan. Ethan barely glanced out of the window. He was on a call, his voice sharp and commanding. "No, the Q3 projections are soft. We need to be more aggressive in the emerging markets. Schedule a board meeting for Monday morning. I don't care that I'll be jet-lagged. Make it happen." He ended the call and finally offered Sierra a self-satisfied smile. "Sorry about that. The Empire never sleeps." The line was meant to impress, and it did. To Sierra, his power was the most attractive thing about him. It was the key that unlocked this world for her. Their arrival was seamless. A black Mercedes S-Class whisked them from the private airfield at Le Bourget to the Hotel Plaza Athénée on the prestigious Avenue Montaigne. The lobby was a symphony of marble, crystal, and the hushed tones of the world's wealthiest citizens. Their suite was a marvel of Parisian opulence. A balcony offered a picture-perfect view of the Eiffel Tower, which Sierra immediately began to exploit for a photo shoot, cycling through a suitcase full of designer outfits Ethan had bought for her. He watched her, a glass of champagne in hand, feeling a sense of profound satisfaction. This was life. This was success made manifest. He was providing this fantasy for her, and her adoration was his reward. "The Ore show is tomorrow night," she said, striking a pose in a crimson dress. "I need to look perfect. This is my chance to get noticed by the big brands, maybe even get a real campaign." "You'll be the most beautiful woman there," Ethan said, his voice a low murmur. "I'll make sure of it." Meanwhile, across the city, in the less ostentatious but equally chic Saint-Germain-des-Prés district, Amelia Davenport was having a very different Parisian experience. She had arrived 2 days earlier on a commercial flight, first class, but without the fanfare. She checked into a discreet 5-star boutique hotel, Le Bristol, under her maiden name. Her days were not filled with photo shoots and champagne, but with quiet, focused work. Her suite had been converted into a makeshift command center. Fabric swatches, lighting plots, and seating charts were spread across a grand mahogany table. Standing beside her was Adrian Cole, the creative genius behind Ore. He was a man in his late 40s with kind, intense eyes and perpetually ink-stained fingers. He looked at Amelia not with the deference of an employee, but with the deep, abiding respect of a co-conspirator. "The final walk-through is tonight," he said, his voice lending a musical quality to his words. "The music, the lights, the choreography, it's all coming together. It is our best work, Amelia. Your belief has unleashed everything." 6 months ago, Adrian had been on the verge of losing his atelier. The fashion world loved his artistry, but his lack of business acumen had left him vulnerable. Critics praised his vision, but the banks were calling in his loans. He had refused to compromise, to sell out to a major conglomerate that would have diluted his brand into a mass-market commodity. Then Amelia had appeared. She hadn't come as a bored billionaire's wife looking for a vanity project. She came with a meticulous business plan. She had studied his work, his finances, his potential. She saw what the conglomerates missed. That true luxury wasn't about logos, it was about soul. She invested not just her money, but her intellect. She helped him restructure the business, secure new suppliers, and plan a relaunch that would shake the industry. All on one condition. Her involvement was to remain an absolute secret until she decided otherwise. She was the ghost in the machine, the silent partner whose name appeared on no official documents, only on the private trust that owned the company. "How are you feeling?" Adrian asked, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "All this stress. It cannot be good for the baby." Amelia placed a hand on her stomach. "He's calm," she said with a small smile. "I think he likes the hustle. He's a Davenport, after all. We build things." Her smile faded slightly. "Have you confirmed the seating?" Adrian nodded, tapping a specific spot on the digital chart projected onto the wall. "Row A, seats 12 and 13, as requested, directly in the sightline of the main runway exit. They will have a perfect view. And the photographers, the key ones, have been briefed. They know something big is happening at the finale. They are expecting a surprise celebrity cameo. They will be ready. Good, Amelia said, her voice turning to steel. Nothing can be left to chance. That evening, a twist of fate nearly unraveled the entire plan. Amelia and her best friend, Penelope Hart, a sharp-witted corporate lawyer who had flown in to support her, decided to have a quiet dinner at L'Avenue, a chic restaurant just a stone's throw from Ethan's hotel. They sat at a discreet table inside, enjoying the relative anonymity. As they were finishing their main course, the restaurant's doors swung open. A wave of murmurs and subtle glances swept through the room. Ethan Whittaker had arrived, and on his arm was Sierra Blake, resplendent in a shimmering silver dress. Penelope's wineglass froze halfway to her lips. "Amelia," she whispered, eyes wide, "don't look now." But Amelia had already seen them. Her heart gave a painful lurch. It was one thing to know about the affair, to see pictures, to plan her revenge from a distance. It was another to see it in the flesh. The proprietary way he held Sierra's arm, the brilliant false smile he flashed at the maître d'œuvre, the way Sierra basked in the reflected glory of his presence. A wave of raw, primitive hurt washed over her, so potent it almost took her breath away. For a terrifying second, she thought Ethan saw her. His eyes swept the room, and their gazes almost met. But his attention snagged on a rival tech CEO sitting near the front, Marcus Ellison, and he moved toward him, all glad-handing charisma and competitive energy. Amelia ducked her head, her hair falling like a curtain to shield her face. "Let's go," she said, her voice tight. "Now." Penelope threw some euros on the table, and they slipped out a side entrance, melting into the Parisian night. As they walked briskly down the street door, the cold air a balm on Amelia's burning cheeks, Penelope put a comforting arm around her. "Are you okay?" Amelia took a deep, shuddering breath, composing herself. The flicker of hurt was rapidly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "I'm fine," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "In fact, I'm better than fine. He just reminded me exactly why I'm doing this." She hailed a taxi, her posture once again erect and rigid. The hunter had just gotten a glimpse of her prey, and it had only sharpened her appetite for the chase. The day of the Ore show dawned with an electric tension that hummed through Paris. For Sierra, it felt like her coronation day. She woke to a breakfast of champagne and macarons delivered by a white-gloved butler. Ethan had already arranged for a team, a hairstylist and makeup artist, to come to their suite. "I want to look iconic," Sierra instructed them, showing a mood board on her iPad filled with images of supermodels and A-list actresses. Chic, but also sexy. Effortless, but like I spent hours on it. Ethan watched the transformation from an armchair, fielding business calls and feeling a swelling pride. He was the great enabler, the man who made fantasy a reality. Sierra preening in front of the mirror was a testament to his influence. He'd even tried to leverage his status further. "My PR people are telling me our seats are A12 and 13, he'd said to Sierra earlier. "Good, but not the best. The center seats, 1 through 5, are usually for the Anna Wintours of the world. I made a call to the event organizers, tried to get us moved up. It's a matter of respect." He had been uncharacteristically rebuffed. The response from Ore's team had been polite but firm. The seating chart was final and had been personally approved by the designer. No exceptions. It was a minor annoyance, a small scratch on his otherwise perfect day. But it bothered him. Ethan Whittaker was not a man who was told no. "It doesn't matter, baby," Sierra said, sensing his irritation. "We're in the front row. That's all anyone will see in the pictures. And once they see my face, they won't be looking at anyone else." Her confidence was a balm to his ego. She was right. It was a minor detail. The important thing was being there, being seen. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Amelia. "Hope the meetings in Geneva are going well. Thinking of you. XO." A fresh wave of guilt, stronger this time, washed over him. He pictured her alone in New York, her life on hold while she waited for their baby, while he was here living this dazzling lie. He typed a quick reply. "Going great. Very productive. Miss you. Be home soon." The lie tasted like acid. He pushed the feeling down again, harder this time. He would make it up to her. He would buy her a necklace, something exquisite. He'd be a better husband when he got back. But tonight was for him. Tonight was for Sierra. Across town, the atmosphere in Amelia's suite was one of quiet, focused intensity. There was no glam squad, no champagne. Amelia, dressed in simple black trousers and a silk blouse, stood before a full-length mirror. Penelope stood beside her, holding up a single garment. It was the final piece from the Auré collection, an item so secret it hadn't even been in the main studio. It was a coat, but to call it a coat was like calling the Sistine Chapel a painted ceiling. It was a masterpiece of midnight blue velvet, so dark it was almost black. The cut was architectural, with strong shoulders and a flowing line designed to drape elegantly over her pregnant form, accentuating it rather than hiding it. The lining was the true secret, woven from a silk thread infused with real silver, a technique Amelia had discovered in her research, which shimmered with an ethereal lunar glow whenever it caught the light. It was a garment that spoke of power, mystery, and unapologetic femininity. "Adrian has outdone himself," Penelope breathed, her lawyerly composure momentarily forgotten. "It's a suit of armor, Amelia. A beautiful velvet suit of armor." Amelia ran her hand over the fabric. "It's a statement," she corrected softly. "It says, I am not a victim. I am the creator. I am the mother, and I am the boss." Adrian arrived not with the frenetic energy of a designer on show day, but with a zen-like calm. He looked at Amelia in the coat and simply nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Spare," he whispered. "It is you." They went over the plan one last time. Adrian would walk the runway at the end of the show to take his bow, as was tradition, but then he would signal for a microphone. He would speak about the rebirth of his brand, about the secret visionary who made it possible. And then he would introduce her. Amelia would step out from the wings, walk to the center of the runway, and take her place in the spotlight she had built for herself. "Are you nervous?" Adrian asked. Amelia looked at her reflection. She saw the quiet wife Ethan had left behind, but she also saw the Davenport heiress, the shrewd investor, and the soon-to-be mother. They were all merging into one formidable woman. "I'm not nervous," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm ready. Let's go give them a show they'll never forget." As dusk fell over Paris, two cars made their way toward the Grand Palais. One was a gleaming Mercedes, carrying a billionaire and his mistress, both buzzing with anticipation for the spectacle they were about to witness. The other was a discreet black Citroën, carrying a pregnant wife and her designer, both filled with a quiet resolve for the spectacle they were about to create. The battle lines had been drawn. The stage was set. The audience was waiting. The interior of the Grand Palais had been transformed. Where once there was a vast, empty hall, Adrian Cole had created an enchanted forest at midnight. Towering skeletal trees, sculpted from black steel, reached toward the glass ceiling. The runway was a winding path of polished obsidian that snaked through the trees, and a low-hanging mist clung to the floor, lit from below with a soft blue light. The atmosphere was dramatic, ethereal, and intensely beautiful. It was a world away from the bright, sterile, white runways of most shows. Ethan and Sierra found their seats, A12 and A13. Ethan's earlier annoyance returned as he saw their position was not central, but off to the side near the point where the models would exit the runway. They had a clear view, but it felt peripheral. He saw his rival, Marcus Ellison, seated dead center, and gave him a curt, professional nod. "Oh my God, Ethan, look," Sierra whispered, eyes wide as she scanned the front row. A-list actresses, rival designers, influential editors. It was a who's who of the fashion world. She was breathing the same rarefied air. Her phone was already out, discreetly snapping photos. This is it. This is everything. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. A single haunting cello note echoed through the space, and the show began. The first model emerged from the mist, wearing a gown that seemed woven from moonlight and shadows. The collection, titled Nocturne, was a masterpiece. It was a departure from Adrian's previous, more colorful work. This was darker, more powerful, more mature. There were tailored suits in charcoal gray with razor-sharp shoulders, flowing dresses in deep indigos and burgundies, coats that wrapped the models like protective cocoons. The fabrics were exquisite, velvets, heavy silks, and a unique shimmering wool that seemed to drink the light. Even Ethan, whose knowledge of fashion was limited to price tags and brand recognition, was impressed. This wasn't just clothing. It was art. It was power. "He's a genius," he murmured, genuinely captivated. Sierra was mesmerized, her influencer brain calculating the viral potential of every single look. Each piece was a statement, a future magazine cover, a red carpet moment waiting to happen. This show was going to be legendary, and she was here, witnessing it. The collection unfolded, look after stunning look. The music swelled, a symphony of strings and melancholic piano that perfectly matched the clothes. The audience was rapt, a sea of silent, upturned faces. This was more than a fashion show. It was a transcendent experience. The finale began. The models walked the runway one last time in a stunning procession, a river of dark, shimmering beauty flowing through the enchanted forest. As the last model disappeared into the mist, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. The lights came up slightly. A spotlight found a lone figure emerging from the wings. It was Adrian Cole. He looked overwhelmed, his eyes shining with tears as he took in the standing ovation. He walked the length of the runway, blowing kisses, hands pressed to his heart. He was a man reborn, a visionary vindicated. He stopped at the head of the runway, right in front of the center seats. The applause began to die down as he held up a hand. An assistant rushed out and gave him a microphone. This was unusual. Designers took a bow. They didn't give speeches. A buzz of curiosity went through the room. Ethan leaned toward Sierra. "A bit dramatic, isn't it?" "Shh," she said, utterly captivated. Adrian took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly but filled with passion. "Thank you," he began, making the words sound even more sincere. "Thank you all for being here tonight. For a long time I was lost. I had a vision, but I did not have the means. I had a voice, but no one was listening. The soul of Ore was fading." He paused, his eyes scanning the front row. "They say that in business you must be ruthless. You must be loud. You must compromise. I was told to sell my name, to dilute my dream. I almost did." Another pause. He was a master showman. The entire room hung on his every word. "But then," he continued, his voice growing stronger, "an angel appeared. Not an angel with wings, but an angel with a business plan. An angel with a vision far greater than my own. Someone who saw the soul of this house and believed in it. Someone who invested not just money but wisdom, strength, and a quiet, ferocious courage that I have never seen before. Ethan felt a flicker of unease. Who was this mystery backer? He glanced at Marcus Ellison, wondering if he had somehow swooped in and bought the brand. For 6 months, Adrian went on, his voice ringing with emotion, this person has been my partner, my strategist, and my inspiration. We decided that our work should speak for itself first. But tonight, on the night of our rebirth, it is time for the silence to end. It is time for the true visionary behind Ore to take her place in the light. Sierra was on the edge of her seat, her phone secretly recording. A surprise celebrity investor? Angelina Jolie? Beyoncé? The reveal would break the internet. Adrian's eyes found their section. His gaze seemed to lock directly onto Ethan. For a split second, Ethan felt a cold dread snake up his spine. It was impossible, a coincidence. Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian's voice boomed through the Grand Palais. Please welcome the heart, the mind, and the soul of the new Ore, the woman who made all of this possible, Ms. Amelia Davenport. The name hung in the air for a single, silent, heart-stopping second. Amelia Davenport. Ethan's brain failed to process it. It was a glitch, a misfire. The name was familiar, but the context was alien. It was like hearing his home address announced as the location of the next Olympics. It made no sense. He looked at Sierra, who wore a confused frown. Davenport, she whispered. Is that an actress? And then she emerged from the mist. Amelia stepped out from the exact spot where the models had exited, the spot directly in front of their seats. She was wearing the midnight blue velvet coat, a garment so powerful and elegant it commanded the attention of the entire room. It was unbuttoned, draped perfectly over her 5-month pregnant belly, which she was not hiding, but presenting as a symbol of her power. Her hair was styled in sleek, elegant waves. Her makeup was subtle but striking. She looked ethereal, regal, absolutely formidable. A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by a frantic explosion of camera flashes. The photographers, already prepped for a surprise, went into a frenzy. The sound was like a machine gun firing, the light a strobing, blinding blitz. Ethan's world didn't just crumble, it vaporized. The blood drained from his face, leaving him clammy and ashen. The champagne in his stomach turned to poison, the air in his lungs solidified. He could see Amelia's face, her expression serene, her eyes cold as diamonds. She wasn't looking at the crowd or the cameras. She was looking directly at him. In that one silent, devastating gaze, he saw it all. The lies, the betrayals, his condescension. Her quiet research, not into quaint hobbies, but into a multi-million-dollar power play. The trip to Geneva wasn't a secret from her. His entire life was an open book she had just set on fire for the world to read. Sierra finally understood. The name Davenport clicked into place. The pregnant belly, the way the woman on the runway was staring at the man beside her. The color drained from Sierra's face too, but for a different reason. This wasn't a career-making moment. This was a catastrophe. She was not the star of a fairy tale. She was the gaudy, disposable villain in a revenge epic. She felt the eyes of everyone around them, the whispers starting to ripple through the rows. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Amelia walked slowly, gracefully, to the center of the stage to join Adrian. He took her hand and held it up as if presenting a champion. The applause, hesitant at first, swelled into a roar. The industry insiders, the editors, the buyers, they understood. This wasn't just a family drama. It was a legendary business story, a brilliant, stealthy takeover. The soul of Ore, Adrian declared into the mic, and the room exploded again. Ethan was frozen, a statue of shame. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, burning holes into his skin. He saw Marcus Ellison looking over, not with rivalry, but with a kind of morbid, fascinated pity. The carefully constructed edifice of his life, his power, his image, had been demolished by one woman in a velvet coat. As Amelia and Adrian took their final bow and walked off the stage, the spell broke. Ethan shot to his feet, his mind screaming. He had to get to her. He had to talk to her, to explain. To what? He just had to get to her. He pushed past a stunned Sierra and tried to rush toward the backstage entrance. Sir, you cannot come back here." A huge security guard materialized, blocking his path with a firm hand on his chest. "She's my wife," Ethan yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "Let me through." "My instructions are clear, monsieur," the guard said, face impassive. "No one is permitted backstage." The instructions, of course, had come directly from Amelia. He was trapped, humiliated. He turned back to his seat, but Sierra was already gone, having scurried away into the crowd, her face hidden behind her hands. He was utterly, completely alone in a room full of people who were all staring at his public execution. The flashbulbs, once his favorite drug, were now the instruments of his torture, capturing his despair from every angle. He stumbled out of the Grand Palais and into the cold Parisian night. The name on everyone's lips was Ore. The face on every phone screen was Amelia's, and the story that was about to go viral across the globe was his spectacular, self-inflicted downfall. The king had not just been dethroned, he had been revealed as a fool in his own court. The fallout was not a slow burn. It was a digital wildfire. By the time Ethan stumbled back into the sterile silence of his suite at the Plaza Athénée, the story was already the #1 trending topic worldwide. The headlines were brutal and brilliant. Forbes. Not just revenge. It's a takeover. How Amelia Davenport turned heartbreak into a fashion empire. Vogue. The ultimate power move. Inside Ore's shocking Paris reveal. New York Post. Billionaire's Paris tryst ends with wife on the runway and on the board. The internet, with its insatiable appetite for drama, devoured the story. Memes were already circulating. Ethan's shocked face next to Amelia's serene one. Sierra's horrified expression captioned, "My face when I realize I'm the side character." The narrative was irresistible. The underestimated pregnant wife emerging as a brilliant, powerful strategist, while the cheating husband and his influencer mistress were publicly humiliated. Amelia was instantly canonized as a feminist icon, a patron saint of scorned women everywhere. Ethan was the villain, a caricature of masculine arrogance and infidelity. Sierra was a punchline. Ethan threw his phone across the room, where it clattered against a Louis XVI chair. He paced the suite like a caged animal. The champagne on ice seemed to mock him. He called Amelia's phone. It went straight to voicemail. He called a dozen more times, his desperation growing with each unanswered ring. He texted a frantic torrent of words. "Amelia, please, we need to talk. I can explain. That was a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake. I love you. You know I love you. Please don't do this." "Amelia, answer me." The silence on her end was more damning than any angry response. It was the silence of complete and total control. She had said everything she needed to say on that runway. Sierra was experiencing her own private hell. She had fled to the hotel bathroom, locked the door, and was now watching her career disintegrate in real time. Her Instagram comments, once a stream of heart emojis and goals, had turned into a cesspool of vitriol. Home wrecker. Did you enjoy the show? Watched it from the front row, right? Imagine trying to build a brand by destroying a family. Pathetic. Her coat probably costs more than your entire career. Her followers were abandoning her in droves. Brands that had sent her free products were posting statements clarifying they had no official relationship with her. An agency that had been courting her for a lucrative skincare campaign sent a curt email officially rescinding their offer. In a world where public perception was everything, she had become toxic overnight. She was crying, mascara-stained tears dripping onto the cold marble floor. Her fairy tale had ended, and there was no Prince Charming to save her, only a locked bathroom door and the glow of a phone screen broadcasting her shame to the world. Unable to reach Amelia, Ethan did the only thing he knew how to do. He tried to regain control. He called his head of PR, a man named George Nolan. "George, you need to fix this," Ethan roared into the phone. "Issue a statement. Something. Anything." There was a weary sigh on the other end. "Ethan, what statement could we possibly issue? The pictures are everywhere. There are photos of you and Ms. Blake at dinner last night. There are photos of your face when your wife walked onto that runway. We have no move here." "Then make one. You're a PR genius, for God's sake." "A PR genius can't spin a guillotine, Ethan," George said, voice flat. And that's what this was, a perfectly executed, publicly witnessed beheading of your reputation. The advice from our crisis team is unanimous. Go dark. Say nothing. Disappear. Disappear? I have a multi-billion-dollar company to run. About that, George said, tone grim. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. They're invoking the moral turpitude clause in your contract. They want to discuss your position as CEO. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. His company, the thing he had built from nothing, was being threatened because of this, because of his arrogance, because he had underestimated his quiet, art-loving wife. The next 24 hours were a blur of humiliation. He was forced to leave the Plaza Athénée, as the hotel management politely informed him his presence was creating a disruption for their other high-profile guests, a clear sign that his profile was no longer the right kind. He booked a flight back to New York, a commercial flight this time, huddled under a baseball cap in a business-class seat, feeling the stares of other passengers. Sierra was left behind. He sent her a single, cold text. "I'll wire you the money we discussed. This is over." He cut her loose without a second thought. Another problem to be discarded. She was collateral damage in a war she hadn't even known she was fighting. Back in Paris, Amelia was in her suite at Le Bristol, not celebrating, but working. The Ore website had crashed from the traffic. Pre-orders for the Nocturne collection, which they had decided to make available immediately, had surpassed their most optimistic year-long projections in a matter of hours. The velvet coat, christened the Davenport, had a waitlist of over 10,000 people. Penelope was coordinating with a team of lawyers back in New York, preparing the initial divorce filings. Adrian was fielding calls from every major department store in the world, from Bergdorf Goodman to Harrods. Amelia was calm, composed, the eye of the hurricane she had created. She looked at a live feed of Whitaker Analytics' stock ticker. It was plummeting. The market, like the public, had passed its judgment. She finally looked at her phone. Dozens of missed calls and frantic texts from Ethan. She read them, her face devoid of expression. Then she opened a new message and typed a single sentence. "I will see you in New York. My lawyers will be in touch to schedule a meeting." It was not the response of a wounded wife. It was the communique of a new and formidable power. The game was over. Now it was time to settle the score. New York was cold and grey when Ethan landed, a perfect mirror of his new reality. The brownstone he had once entered like a conquering hero felt like a mausoleum. The silence was heavy, accusatory. Amelia was not there. Most of her personal belongings were gone, removed with a quiet efficiency, as chilling as her runway reveal. A single sealed envelope lay on the grand entryway table. It was from the law firm of Davenport, Ellis and Croft, her father's old firm. The divorce petition. The emergency board meeting at Whitaker Analytics was a bloodbath. Ethan, unshaven and exhausted, tried to project an aura of control, but the illusion was shattered. The board members, men and women he had handpicked, looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and cold calculation. The moral turpitude clause was their weapon, and the global humiliation of their CEO was the ammunition. The stock had dropped 17%. Key advertisers were pausing their campaigns. His personal drama had become a corporate liability. He wasn't fired. That would be too messy. Instead, he was encouraged to take an indefinite leave of absence, effective immediately. He was stripped of his role as CEO and chairman. He retained his shares, but his power, his identity, was gone. He walked out of the boardroom he had built, a king exiled from his own kingdom. The meeting Amelia had agreed to took place a week later. Not in a stuffy lawyer's office, but on her own turf. She had leased a floor in a sleek, modern building in the meatpacking district, the new headquarters of Ore North America. When Ethan arrived, he was led not into a conference room, but into what was clearly going to be a design studio. The vast, sun-drenched space was mostly empty, save for a few drafting tables and a single, simple table with 2 chairs in the center. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Amelia stood by the large windows, looking out over the Hudson River. She turned as he entered. She wasn't wearing a power suit or a dramatic coat. She was in a simple cashmere sweater and maternity jeans. She looked soft, beautiful, and completely untouchable. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, a clear and present reminder of everything he had broken. "Amelia," he began, his voice rough. "I am so sorry for everything. For Sierra, for Paris, for my lies. It was a sickness, an addiction to something new, something shallow. It meant nothing. You and our child. You are my world." She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit down, Ethan." He sat. She remained standing, a subtle but significant power dynamic. "You say it meant nothing," she said, calm and even. "But it did, didn't it? It meant you respected the thrill of a secret more than you respected me. It meant you valued the validation of a stranger more than the sanctity of our marriage. It meant you saw me as a quiet, domestic fixture in your life, not as your partner." "That's not true," he pleaded. "I was a fool. I was blind. I love you." "The Ethan I loved wouldn't have been capable of this," she replied, a flicker of genuine sadness in her eyes. "The Ethan I loved was ambitious, yes, but he was also my best friend. He would never have underestimated me. That man is gone, or perhaps he never truly existed." She walked over to the table and placed a folder in front of him. "These are the divorce terms. They are not negotiable." He opened the folder. It was as meticulous and devastating as her Paris reveal. She wasn't asking for half his fortune. The Davenport money meant she didn't need it. Instead, she was asking for something far more precise. She wanted the brownstone, which was in her name anyway. She was establishing a trust for their child that he was to fund with a significant but not crippling portion of his liquid assets. The terms for custody were clear. She would have sole physical and legal custody. He would have supervised visitation rights, contingent on his behavior. But there was one final, brilliant, brutal clause. "You'll see I've waived any claim on your Whittaker Analytics shares," she said, watching his face. "With one condition. You will transfer 5% of your total shares into the baby's trust, effective immediately. I will act as the trustee." Ethan's head snapped up. 5%? It was a massive amount, enough to give her a significant voice in the company. His company. "Why?" he whispered. "Why do you want a piece of the company?" Amelia finally allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. "Because you built that company on the idea of predicting human behavior. You analyze data to see what people will want, what they will do, who they are." She placed a hand on her belly. "I am ensuring that our child, your heir, will always have a seat at the table of your legacy. And I, as the child's mother and trustee, will be there to protect that interest. You made me a ghost in my own marriage, Ethan. Now I'll be the ghost in your boardroom, a permanent reminder of what happens when you miscalculate." It was checkmate. She had taken his betrayal and forged it into a weapon that would give her a permanent foothold in his world. She hadn't just left him. She had colonized his empire. He sat there, defeated, the papers in his hand feeling like a death certificate for the life he once knew. He saw the woman before him, the mother of his child, and realized he had never truly known her at all. He had seen a beautiful painting to hang on his wall and missed the fierce, brilliant artist who created it. "Is that all?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Yes, Ethan," she said, turning back to the window, her silhouette framed by the bright promise of the city. "That's all." He left her there in her empty new beginning and walked back into the wreckage of his own making. The millionaire had lost more than a wife. He had lost his throne, his pride, and his future, all because he had failed to see the Queen standing right beside him. So, what are we left with at the end of this Parisian storm? Amelia Davenport's story transcends simple revenge. It's a meticulously crafted epic about reclaiming one's narrative, a powerful lesson in the architecture of a comeback. She didn't just expose a betrayal. She dismantled an empire of arrogance with the very tools her husband dismissed: her intellect, her quiet observation, and her deep understanding of true value. Ethan wasn't just defeated by his wife's secret plan. He was defeated by his own ego, his fatal miscalculation that her silence equated to weakness. His downfall serves as a chilling reminder that the highest towers often have the most fragile foundations. This is a modern fable for the digital age, where reputations can be shattered in a single viral moment. It forces us to ask profound questions about the dynamics of power, respect, and self-worth in our own lives. Was Amelia's revenge perfectly proportional to the offense, or was it a cold, calculated move that went a step too far? And what do you think was the most devastating blow for Ethan? The public humiliation on the runway, or the quiet, clinical finality of losing a stake in his own company? We're dying to read your unfiltered thoughts and theories in the comments below. Let's discuss it. If this story of strategy, betrayal, and ultimate vindication held you captive, show your support by giving this video a powerful like. Share it with anyone who appreciates a story where the Queen brilliantly outplays the King. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. Our community is built on unforgettable stories that matter, and you won't want to miss the next one we unravel. A deal worth $500 million hung in the balance, trapped in the gilded silence of a private dining room. On one side of the table sat two of the most ruthless executives in the tech industry. On the other, an enigmatic Japanese millionaire, Elara Vance, who refused to speak a single word of English. They saw her silence as weakness, her foreign words as nonsense. They smirked They whispered, they belittled her, confident in their superiority. They believed they were in complete control. What they didn't know was that their every sneer and every lie was being watched by the one person in the room. They never even noticed the waitress. The air in the private dining room of Aurelia, one of downtown Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, was thick enough to be cut with the sterling silver knives laid on the table. It was an atmosphere of forced patience, a palpable tension simmering beneath a veneer of corporate civility. The room was a statement in itself. Walls paneled with dark, polished mahogany, a crystal chandelier that dripped light onto the table like frozen tears, and a single vast window offering a godlike view of the sprawling city lights below. On one side of the expansive table sat Richard Sterling and Marcus Thorne. Richard, the CEO of Sterling Innovations, was a man in his late 50s with a mane of silver hair that looked meticulously sculpted and a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating blue eyes. He exuded an aura of old money and unshakable power. Beside him, his vice president of acquisitions, Marcus, was a younger, sleeker version of the same predator. His suit was sharper, his smile wider, but his eyes held the same hungry glint. They were here to close the deal of a lifetime, the acquisition of Vance Robotics, a Japanese firm at the forefront of bio-integrative AI. And on the other side of the table was the reason for their anxiety. Elara Vance. She was not what they had expected. Her name, Vance, was from a brief, long-ago marriage to an American academic, but her entire being was a portrait of Japanese grace and austerity. She was perhaps in her late 60s, her posture ramrod straight, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a simple, elegant knot. She wore a modest dark silk dress, unadorned with any jewelry, save for a simple jade ring. Her face, a mask of calm impassivity, gave away nothing. Accompanying her was her trusted aide, a younger man named David Chen, who sat slightly behind her, his expression a perfect mirror of his employer's stoicism. The problem began the moment she arrived. After the initial greetings, facilitated by David, Elara Vance had spoken. But her words were not the crisp, accented English they were prepared for. They were Japanese, soft, melodic, and utterly incomprehensible to Richard and Marcus. "Mr. Sterling, Ms. Vance is pleased to be here and appreciates you hosting this dinner." David had translated his own English impeccable. Richard had forced a laugh. Of course, a pleasure. Please tell her we are honored." As the appetizers were served, a delicate arrangement of seared scallops and yuzu foam, Richard tried again. "Ms. Vance, your work in neural interfacing is simply revolutionary. We believe that combined with our global distribution network, we can change the world." He paused, beaming, waiting for the translation. David leaned in, murmured to Elara in Japanese, and she responded with a short, quiet phrase. David turned back. "Ms. Vance understands the potential synergies." The conversation, if it could be called that, continued in this stilted, frustrating manner for nearly an hour. Richard and Marcus would deliver a paragraph of enthusiastic corporate flattery, which David would condense into a whisper, receiving a one-sentence reply that he would then translate back. It was like trying to play tennis with a brick wall. Marcus was losing his patience. He leaned towards Richard, cupping his hand to his mouth in a poor attempt at subtlety. "What is this, Richard? Is this some kind of power play? Forcing us to go through him for everything she's making us beg?" Richard's smile was tight, a mask of professionalism cracking at the edges. "Stay calm, Marcus. This is how they do business. It's about respect hierarchy. Just play the game. The prize is worth $500 million. But it felt like more than a game. Elara Vance's eyes, dark and intelligent, seemed to follow their every move. She rarely looked at David when he translated, but instead watched them, her gaze unwavering. It was unnerving. She would occasionally say something directly to them, a stream of Japanese that sounded like a question, her head tilted slightly. Each time they would look at David with panicked helplessness. "She asks if you enjoyed your recent holiday in the Caribbean, Mr. Sterling." David would translate, his face unreadable. Richard would blink, caught off guard. "Oh. Yes, it was wonderful, very relaxing. How did she—" "And she notes that your company's stock fell 2 points this afternoon after the quarterly projections were leaked, Mr. Thorne." David would continue relaying another of Elara's soft-spoken observations. Marcus's face would pale slightly. They were being dissected, analyzed, and the woman holding the scalpel was speaking a language that rendered them completely powerless. Their frustration was curdling into a dangerous mix of anger and arrogance. They were the titans of industry here, not her. This was their city, their restaurant, their deal, and they were being made to feel like fools. Chloe adjusted the crisp white apron around her waist, her movements practiced and silent as she moved along the periphery of the private dining room. She was a ghost in this opulent world, trained to be invisible. Her job was to anticipate needs before they were spoken to, refill a water glass the moment it dipped below halfway, to clear a plate with the stealth of a cat, to exist as a pair of hands, not a person. But Chloe was a watcher. It was how she survived not just the grueling shifts at Aurelia, but life. She noticed the slight tremor in Marcus Thorne's hand as he reached for his wine, a sign of agitation he was trying to suppress. She saw the way Richard Sterling's affable smile was a thin, brittle shell over a chasm of impatience. Most of all, she watched Elara Vance. To Richard and Marcus, the woman was an obstacle, a bizarre, foreign enigma. To Chloe, she was something else entirely. She was familiar. Chloe had grown up in Kyoto. Her father was a cultural attaché at the American Embassy, a quiet academic who had fallen in love with the country and raised his daughter there for 15 years. She had attended a local Japanese school, her days filled with the rigorous cadence of the language, her friendships forged in its nuances. Japanese wasn't just a second language to her. It was the language of her childhood, of scraped knees and first heartbreaks, of whispered secrets with her best friend Aiko. It was the language she still dreamt in, sometimes. Now working 2 jobs to pay her way through a fine arts degree at NYU those years felt a lifetime away. Here she was, just Chloe, the quiet waitress. No one knew that the soft flowing words spoken by Elara Vance were as clear as day to her, and what she heard made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. She heard the translations David Chen provided, and they were accurate, but they were also incomplete. They were literal. They were the sterile, functional words of a professional interpreter. What they lacked was the soul, the subtle honorifics, the intricate subtext that was woven into every syllable Elara Vance spoke. When Elara had asked about Richard's vacation, her tone hadn't been merely inquisitive. There was a layer of polite, almost surgical precision, a phrase that subtly implied, "I know you were conducting unofficial business on that trip." When she had mentioned Marcus's stock, dropping her choice of words was not just an observation. It was a delicate yet unmistakable expression of disappointment, the kind a teacher might use for a promising student who had failed a simple test. She was speaking in a highly formal, almost courtly dialect of Japanese one that conveyed immense authority and intellect. Chloe watched as Marcus, growing bolder with his frustration, launched a new tactic, a condescendingly simple English spoken loudly, as if Alara were deaf or simple-minded. "We are offering you a very good price," he said, holding up his fingers. "Lots of money." Chloe flinched. The insult was so profound, so deeply ignorant, that she felt a phantom sting of shame on his behalf. She saw Alara Vance's eyes for a fraction of a second flicker with something that looked like pain. Not anger, but a deep, weary sadness. David Chen's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, translating Marcus's boorish words dutifully. Alara responded, her voice still quiet, but with an edge, a sharpness that wasn't there before. David translated, "Ms. Vance understands the financial offer." But what Alara had actually said was, "Please tell this child that the buzzing of a fly is more disruptive to my thoughts than his shouting." Chloe nearly dropped the silver water pitcher she was holding. She steadied herself against the wall, her heart hammering. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a disaster. These men, in their blind arrogance, were dismantling a $500 million deal with every condescending word. And Alara Vance was letting them. She was observing their disrespect, cataloguing it, her silence a vessel for their contempt. The final straw came when Richard, convinced that the woman across from him was either playing a foolish game or was genuinely incompetent, decided to discuss strategy with Marcus openly, right at the table. "Look, this is going nowhere," Richard muttered, leaning across the table as if Alara and David were merely furniture. "Let's just get to the final offer. We'll cut out the performance incentives for her executive team. She clearly can't manage them if this is how she behaves. We can absorb them into our own structure and save 20 million off the top. She'll never even know the difference. Just tell her it's a streamlined final offer." Marcus grinned, a flash of predatory teeth. "Brilliant. She's lost in her own world. He'll just translate whatever we tell him to." Chloe stood frozen by the service door, the cold metal of the handle pressing into her back. They were going to defraud her, right here in front of her, using her own childhood language as a shield for their deceit. They assumed her inability to speak English equated to an inability to understand complex deal structures. They saw a woman, not a titan. They saw a foreigner, not a genius. And in that moment, Chloe felt the 15 years in Kyoto rise up in her. She remembered her father teaching her that silence in Japan could be a sign of respect, of deep thought, of strength. It was not a vacuum to be filled with noise and arrogance. She looked at Alara Vance's face, at the profound, lonely intelligence in her eyes. It was the same look she'd seen in her own grandmother's eyes, after her grandfather passed away, a woman surrounded by people who only saw her as a frail widow, not the pillar of strength she was. Her manager's voice echoed in her head. "You are invisible, Chloe. Do not speak to the guests unless spoken to. Ever." It was the cardinal rule. Breaking it meant instant dismissal. It meant rent wouldn't get paid. It meant her dream of finishing her degree would evaporate. But then she heard Alara Vance speak again, her voice almost a whisper. And this time it was not directed at the men. It was a soft, forlorn murmur almost to herself. "Is there no one here who sees—" Chloe's decision was made. Her job, her future, they felt small compared to the colossal injustice unfolding in this gilded cage. She pushed off the door, smoothed her apron, and walked toward the table, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. As Chloe approached the table, the world seemed to slow down. Each step on the plush Persian rug was a deliberate act of defiance. The clinking of cutlery, the low hum of the city outside, everything faded into a muted background buzz. All that mattered were the four figures at the table locked in their tableau of misunderstanding and deceit. Richard and Marcus didn't even notice her at first. They were too busy smirking at each other, confident in their scheme. David Chen's head was bowed slightly, a portrait of resignation. Only Elara Vance's eyes lifted to meet Chloe's. For a fleeting second, Chloe saw a flicker of surprise in them, a momentary crack in the serene facade. Chloe stopped not beside Richard or Marcus, but at a respectful distance from Elara's side of the table. She took a slow, deep breath, the sterile, air-conditioned air, feeling thin in her lungs. This was it. She bowed. Not a deferential servant's nod, but a deep, formal bow from the waist, the kind she hadn't performed in years. It was a bow of profound respect, one reserved for an elder, a teacher, a person of immense status. The gesture was so unexpected, it sliced through the room's tension. Richard and Marcus stopped talking, their heads snapping in her direction. "What the hell is this?" Marcus muttered, a sneer twisting his lips. "Can we get some more wine here? Or—" His voice trailed off as Chloe straightened up, looked directly at Elara Vance, and spoke. Her Japanese was flawless. It was the Kyoto dialect of her youth, formal, humble, and clear as a temple bell. "Vance-sama." She began using the highest form of address, one that bordered on reverence. "Forgive my unforgivable impudence. I am but a humble servant here. However, to stand by and witness this discourtesy is a stain upon this house and my own honor. If you would permit me, I can help." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a stunned, deafening void. Richard and Marcus stared at her, their mouths literally agape. It was as if a piece of furniture had suddenly recited Shakespeare. This girl, the one who had been silently refilling their water, who they hadn't given a second glance, was speaking the very language that had been their wall of frustration all evening. David Chen's head shot up, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked from Chloe to Elara, his professional composure completely shattered for the first time. But the most profound reaction came from Elara Vance herself. The impassive mask she had worn all night crumbled. Her eyes, which had held a universe of lonely wisdom, welled up with sudden glistening tears. Her lips parted slightly, and a small, choked sound escaped her. It was a sound of immense, soul-shattering relief. It was the sound of a prisoner who, after years in solitary confinement, finally hears a voice speaking their native tongue. She responded to Chloe, her own voice, thick with emotion, yet still retaining its innate elegance. You understand?" She asked, her words a fragile whisper. "You understand what has been said?" The meaning behind the words. "I understand everything." "Vance-sama." Chloe replied, her own voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I grew up in Kyoto. I hear not only your words, but your heart." This exchange, lasting no more than 10 seconds, completely reconfigured the power dynamic in the room. Richard and Marcus were no longer in control. They were outsiders, locked out of a conversation that was suddenly flowing with more genuine emotion and meaning than anything they had managed in 2 hours. "What is she saying?" Richard demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. He pointed a finger at Chloe. "Who are you? What did you say to her?" Chloe did not look at him. Her attention remained entirely on Elara. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a conduit, a bridge over a chasm of cultural ignorance. Elara. Vance, with tears now tracing silent paths down her cheeks, gestured a frail, elegant hand toward the empty chair beside her. It was an invitation, an order. She spoke again, a short, clear sentence in Japanese. David Chen, finally finding his voice, translated for the bewildered executives, though his eyes were fixed on Chloe with a look of awe. Miss Vance requests that the young lady join them at the table. Marcus scoffed in disbelief. Join them? She's the waitress. This is insane. But Richard Sterling, for all his arrogance, was a man who understood power, and he could feel it shifting in the room as surely as a tide. The quiet Japanese woman was no longer a passive object. She had found a voice, and that voice belonged to the girl in the white apron. He fell silent, watching his mind racing to calculate this new, impossible variable. Chloe hesitated for only a moment. Then, with a quiet grace she didn't know she possessed, she pulled out the chair and sat down. The world had just turned upside down, and somehow she was at its center. Seated at the mahogany table, the fine linen of the napkin feeling alien in her lap, Chloe felt a profound sense of surreality. The crystal glasses, the ornate silverware, the half-eaten plates of Michelin-starred food, they were artifacts from a world she served, not one she inhabited. Yet the gaze of Elara Vance anchored her, imbuing her with a purpose that dwarfed her anxieties. Richard and Marcus watched their faces a mixture of confusion and fury. This was a flagrant breach of every protocol they understood. I think we deserve an explanation, Richard said, his voice dangerously low. He addressed David Chen, but his glare was fixed on Chloe. What is going on? Before David could speak, Elara addressed Chloe directly in Japanese. Her voice now calm and imbued with a quiet authority. Chloe listened intently, then turned her gaze to the two American executives. For the first time, she spoke to them, her voice clear and measured. My name is Chloe. Ms. Vance has asked me to translate for her. She paused, letting the simple statement land. She feels it is time for you to understand the full context of this meeting. David Chen nodded slowly, giving Chloe his tacit permission. He understood. His role as a purely professional translator was insufficient for what was needed now. What was needed was a human connection. Chloe turned back to Elara, who began to speak. She didn't speak of business of robotics or stock prices. She spoke of a rainy Tuesday in Tokyo 6 months ago. She spoke of a black car, a slick road, and the screech of tires that was the last thing she remembered before waking up in a world of muted colors and confusing sounds. As Elara spoke, Chloe translated her voice, becoming a vessel for the older woman's pain and frustration. 6 months ago. Chloe began her words, painting a stark picture in the opulent room. Ms. Vance was in a serious car accident. She sustained a traumatic brain injury, specifically to the parts of her brain that control language processing Broca's and Wernicke's areas. She paused. Richard and Marcus exchanged a look of disbelief. Her cognitive functions. Chloe continued, the words flowing through her memory, her intelligence, her brilliant engineering mind. They are all perfectly intact. She is the same woman who built a global empire from nothing, but the injury has caused a specific and rare form of expressive aphasia. Chloe took a breath, ensuring she conveyed the gravity of the situation exactly as Elara was expressing it. When she is under stress, her brain defaults. It reverts to its most fundamental pathways. For her, that is her native language. The English she learned in her 20s is inaccessible, a locked room in her own mind. The more she tries to force the words, the more they slip away. The story hung in the air, heavy and shocking. Elara Vance was not being difficult. She was not playing a power game. She was wounded. She was trapped inside her own brilliant mind, able to understand everything, but unable to command the language her audience required. Why wasn't this disclosed? Marcus blurted out, his tone more accusatory than sympathetic. We've been wasting our time here. Elara's eyes flashed, and she spoke a sharp, single sentence. Dignity is not a line item in a quarterly report. Chloe translated her voice as sharp as Elara's. Ms. Vance did not want to be defined by her injury. She did not want pity, nor did she want to be seen as a liability by the company she dedicated her life to building. This deal is not just an acquisition for her. It is her legacy. She has to know that the people she is entrusting it to are people of character, not just opportunists. Chloe's translation was imbued with the fierce pride she heard in Elara's Japanese. She came here tonight to look you in the eye, to gauge your character, your patience, your empathy. She believes you can learn more about a person from how they act when they are confused than when they are comfortable. A wave of shame so potent it was almost visible should have washed over Richard and Marcus. Their condescension, their loud, slow-talking insults, their whispered conspiracy to cheat her, all of it had been a test they had failed spectacularly. But shame was not a currency Richard Sterling dealt in. He saw not a tragedy, but an opening, a weakness to be exploited. His mind, ever the calculator, was already re-evaluating the deal based on this new information. A vulnerable seller, a seller with a brain injury. He leaned forward, his earlier frustration replaced by a slick, predatory sympathy. Miss Vance. Elara. My God, that's terrible. We had no idea. Please accept our deepest apologies. Of course we understand. And we want to help. His eyes gleamed. In fact, this makes everything so much simpler. We can take the burden off your shoulders. We can expedite the deal, handle the details, so you can focus on your recovery. There's no need to trouble you with the complex clauses and performance metrics. Marcus quickly caught on his expression, shifting to one of mock concern. Yes, absolutely. The last thing you need is more stress. We can sign a letter of intent tonight, a simple one, just to get the ball rolling, for your own good. Chloe felt a chill creep up her spine as she translated their words. She relayed the meaning, the sympathetic tone, but she also saw the truth behind their eyes. They were sharks that had just scented blood in the water. They weren't seeing a person to be respected. They were seeing a target to be taken down. Elara Vance listened to the translation, her face unreadable once more. She then looked at Chloe, and in her eyes, Chloe saw a flicker of the same weary disappointment she had seen earlier. The test was not over. In fact, it had just entered its most dangerous phase. The dinner was no longer a dinner. It was a battlefield, and Chloe, the waitress, was now standing on the front line, armed with nothing but her understanding of 2 languages and a growing sense of dread. The air, which had briefly cleared with the honesty of Elara's confession, was now thick with a new kind of poison predatory opportunism. Richard slid a leather-bound folder from his briefcase and placed it in the center of the table. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. This is our revised offer, he announced, his voice smooth as silk. It's simplified, much more straightforward. It accelerates the payout and places the operational transition entirely in our hands. It's a turnkey solution designed for your peace of mind, Elara. He was using her first name now. The false intimacy was nauseating. Chloe felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She was a fine art student. She knew about Renaissance painters and modernist sculpture, not leveraged buyouts and equity transfers. But she had to try. She had to be more than a mouthpiece. Elara gestured for Chloe to examine the document. As Chloe picked it up, she felt the weight of it. The cold, smooth paper, filled with dense, legalistic text. She began to read the key clauses aloud to Elara in Japanese, her voice slow and careful. As she did, she could feel Richard and Marcus watching her, their patience already wearing thin. Clause 7b, Richard interrupted, is a standard indemnity clause, just legal boilerplate. We can skip that. Section 12, Marcus added, just outlines the redundancy protocols for her executive team. It's really just a formality. They were trying to direct her to control the flow of information, but as Chloe read, certain phrases snagged her attention. She had spent enough late nights helping her diplomat father proofread documents to recognize the scent of deliberately obtuse language. "One moment," Chloe said, holding up a hand. She looked at Elara and switched to Japanese. "Vance-sama." They are glossing over these sections, but the language here is evasive. Clause 7b is not a standard indemnity clause. It appears to give their company unilateral power to renegotiate all of Vance Robotics' existing intellectual property licenses after the merger. They could sell off your core patents. Elara's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She gave a slight nod for Chloe to continue. And Section 12, Chloe went on, her heart pounding, is not about redundancy. It's a non-compete clause. But it is written so broadly that it would not only prevent your top executives from working elsewhere, it would effectively prevent you personally from engaging in any related technological endeavors for a period of 10 years. They are trying to buy not just your company, but your future. Chloe was no longer just translating. She was analyzing. She was protecting. With every sentence she decoded, she felt a surge of adrenaline. The two powerful men at the table suddenly seemed smaller, their expensive suits and confident smiles, nothing more than cheap camouflage for their greed. Richard was becoming agitated. "What's the hold-up? What are you telling her? Just tell her it's a standard agreement." Chloe met his glare, her own expression unyielding. "I am ensuring Ms. Vance understands the full and precise meaning of every clause, Mr. Sterling. As you can appreciate, clarity is paramount in a deal of this magnitude." Her formal corporate language coming from a waitress seemed to stun him into momentary silence. Elara then posed a question in Japanese, her tone deceptively light. Chloe translated. "Ms. Vance is curious about the revised valuation of the company's R&D division. The initial offer had it pegged at $100 million. In this new document, that figure appears to be absent, folded into a general assets category." Marcus waved a dismissive hand. "It's a clerical simplification. The overall number is what matters. It's all in there, don't worry." Elara spoke again, her words soft, but carrying the weight of steel. Chloe's translation was precise. "Vance-sama says that in her experience, when a number of that size becomes silent, it is rarely for clerical reasons. She asks you to point to the exact line item where the value of her life's research is accounted for." A bead of sweat trickled down Marcus Thorne's temple. He and Richard began flipping through their copies of the document, a frantic rustling sound that filled the room. They were flustered. They had assumed their opponent was incapacitated, that the translator was a simple tool. They had never expected such surgical, informed questioning. They had never expected Chloe. Elara Vance sat back in her chair, a picture of absolute calm. She took a delicate sip of her tea. For the first time all evening, a tiny, almost imperceptible whistle touched the corners of her lips. She was not the wounded animal they had perceived. She was a hunter, and she had just watched her prey walk confidently into a trap of their own making. Chloe realized with a jolt that Elara's questions weren't just for information. She already knew the answers. She understood the contract perfectly. The aphasia affected her ability to speak English, not to read it. She hadn't needed a translator for the words on the page. She had needed one for the men in the room. She had needed a witness. The entire evening, the silence, the confusion, her apparent vulnerability, it had all been the most elaborate high-stakes character test imaginable. And now it was time for the final exam. The atmosphere in the room had transformed. The cloying scent of predatory confidence had been replaced by the acrid smell of panic. Richard and Marcus were whispering furiously to each other, their heads bent over the contract, unable to find the justification they needed. Their carefully constructed facade of control was crumbling into dust. Elara Vance watched them for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at Chloe and began to speak. Her Japanese was different now. The soft, formal tones were gone, replaced by a voice that was crisp, commanding, and utterly resolute. It was the voice of a CEO, a leader, a woman who had bent the male-dominated world of technology to her will. Chloe listened, her eyes wide. The instructions were specific, the message devastatingly clear. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and prepared to deliver the final blow. She turned to Richard and Marcus, whose frantic whispering ceased as they saw the look on her face. "Gentlemen," Chloe began, her voice ringing with an authority that was not entirely her own, "Ms. Vance has instructed me to convey her final decision." She let the words hang in the air, the silence stretching into an uncomfortable eternity. "First," Chloe said, her gaze locking onto Richard, "regarding your attempt to bury the intellectual property clause, Ms. Vance recognizes this as a blatant attempt to asset strip her company, effectively stealing the core technology patents that are the soul of Vance Robotics. She considers this not just a breach of good faith, but a profound personal insult." Richard's face went pale. "Second," Chloe continued, turning to Marcus, "regarding the deceptively worded non-compete clause. Ms. Vance finds it amusing. The suggestion that she would allow a man like you, who cannot even read his own balance sheet without leaking it, to dictate the terms of her life's work, is, in her words, the pinnacle of delusional arrogance." Marcus looked as if he had been physically struck. "And third," Chloe said, her voice dropping slightly, "regarding the deliberate obfuscation of the R&D division's value. That division is currently developing Project Chimera, a technology you are not even aware of, which has a projected market value far exceeding this entire company. Your attempt to acquire it for nothing is noted." The two men were speechless, utterly defeated. They had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and laid bare by the very woman they had dismissed as a confused old foreigner. But the masterstroke was yet to come. Elara spoke one final time, in Japanese, a short, simple phrase. As she did, her aide David Chen, who had been silent for over an hour, reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, sleek digital audio recorder. He placed it on the table and pressed a button. Richard's voice, tinny and distorted, filled the silent room. "Let's just get to the final offer. We'll cut out the performance incentives for her executive team. We can absorb them into our own structure and save 20 million off the top. She'll never even know the difference." Marcus's voice followed, dripping with contempt. brilliant. She's lost in her own world. The recording played their entire whispered conversation, every greedy, dismissive, and fraudulent word echoing in the opulent dining room like a death sentence. When it finished, a profound silence descended. Richard Sterling looked ashen, his silver hair suddenly seeming less distinguished and more like the mark of an old, tired fool. Marcus Thorne was staring at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. And then the final miracle happened. Elara Vance looked across the table directly at Richard and Marcus. She leaned forward slightly, and in a voice that was quiet, raspy from disuse, but perfectly chillingly clear, she spoke her first English words of the night. "I believe," she said, her accent a faint, elegant melody, "this negotiation is over." The shock was absolute. It was a thunderclap in a silent church. The locked room in her mind had been opened. Perhaps it was the release of stress, the adrenaline of victory, or simply the sheer force of her will. But she had broken through the aphasia. She stood up, her posture regal. David Chen held her chair. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Chloe, a gesture of immense gratitude and shared victory. Then, without another glance at the two ruined men, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the wreckage of a $500 million deal and two careers that were for all intents and purposes finished. The sound of the door clicking shut was the loudest noise Chloe had ever heard. Of course, here is a rewritten and significantly expanded version of Part 7, delving deeper into the emotional and psychological aftermath for Chloe, drawing out the tension and making the life-changing offer a more detailed and profound moment. Chloe stood alone in the private dining room, a ghost in a gilded cage that had suddenly become a tomb. The silence left in Elara Vance's wake was not peaceful. It was a physical presence, a high-pitched ringing in her ears that was the sound of her life teetering on a knife's edge. The rich scent of roasted duck and truffle oil now seemed cloying and decadent, the smell of a world she had just violated. Richard and Marcus had vanished, like apparitions, their panicked retreat, leaving behind a tangible aura of disgrace. They had left everything, briefcases agape, pens, and the fraudulent contract sitting squarely in the center of the table, a monument to their greed. The adrenaline that had sharpened her senses and steadied her voice began its cruel retreat, leaving a cold, trembling weakness in its place. She reached out and touched the back of the mahogany chair she had sat in the wood, still warm. It was the only thing that felt real. Had that all just happened? Had she? Chloe, a fine arts student who supplemented her ramen noodle diet by serving canapes to the 1% just committed career suicide in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a frantic question. What have I done? What have I done? The cardinal rule, the one branded into every server at Aurelia, screamed in her mind. You are invisible. You are silent. You do not exist. She had not only existed, she had appointed herself judge, jury, and translator. The service door swung open with a violent slam, and her manager, a severe man named Mr. Dubois, with a perpetually pinched face, stormed into the room. His face was a mottled shade of crimson, his eyes blazing with a fury that made Chloe's blood run cold. Chloe, he hissed, his voice a low, dangerous weapon. He didn't shout. It was far more terrifying than that. Do you have any idea what you have just done? Chloe stood frozen, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture of ingrained servitude. Mr. Dubois, I can explain. Explain. He let out a short, incredulous laugh that had no humor in it. Explain what? How you decided to abandon your post, How you took it upon yourself to sit down. Sit down with a guest in the middle of a private dinner. I have Richard Sterling's chief of staff on the phone, screaming so loud I'm surprised the crystal in here hasn't shattered. He's threatening to sue not just you, but this entire restaurant for breach of privacy, for unprofessional conduct, for God knows what else. He advanced on her, his steps menacing on the plush carpet. Our reputation is built on discretion, on silent, perfect service. And you, in 10 minutes, have potentially destroyed it. You are fired, of course. That is a given. But I assure you, you will be so blacklisted in this city, you won't be able to get a job washing dishes in a back-alley diner. Pack your things. Get out of my sight. Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of her precarious life in New York. Her tuition payment was due in 3 weeks. Her rent was already late. The dream of one day curating a gallery of a life surrounded by art and beauty dissolved into a terrifying vision of eviction notices and crushing debt. She had acted on principle, on a deep-seated sense of justice, and this was her reward. Ruin. As Chloe opened her mouth to speak, though she had no words to offer, the dining room door opened again, this time with a soft, deliberate click. David Chen stood on the threshold, his presence instantly commanding the space. His suit was immaculate, his expression utterly calm, but his eyes held a cold fire that made Mr. Dubois's theatrical rage look childish. "I believe you are mistaken," David said, his voice quiet, yet carrying an authority that sliced through the manager's tirade. He took a step into the room, his gaze fixed on Mr. Dubois. Miss Chloe was not acting on her own accord. She was acting on a direct and explicit request from my employer, Ms. Elara Vance. Mr. Dubois blinked, his momentum broken. "What? That's impossible. She was providing a service that neither you nor your esteemed guests were equipped to offer clarity and respect." David continued, his tone unwavering. He took another step, and the manager instinctively took one back. The power dynamic had been redrawn in an instant. As for Mr. Sterling, I would advise him to be very careful about making threats. We have a recording of him and Mr. Thorne conspiring to commit wire fraud and contractual deception. My next call is to our legal team. His chief of staff will soon have far more pressing concerns than the conduct of a waitress. The color drained from Mr. Dubois's face. The name Vance, which before had just been a name on a reservation, now landed with the weight of a global corporation and its army of lawyers. David's attention shifted from the stunned manager to Chloe. The coldness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a genuine warmth and a profound look of respect that felt more valuable than any paycheck. "Ms. Vance would like to speak with you. She is waiting in her car downstairs. Please come with me." He said it not as an order, but as a gentle invitation. He then turned his head slightly towards Mr. Dubois. "See to it that her personal belongings are gathered and delivered to the address I will provide. She will not be returning." Without another word, he held the door open for Chloe. She walked past her former manager, who stood gaping like a fish, his authority utterly dismantled. She didn't look back. She walked through the bustling main dining room, where other servers and staff paused their work to stare whispering behind their hands. She was a curiosity, a scandal in motion. She felt their eyes on her back as she shed her white apron, folding it and placing it on a service counter, a final symbolic act of leaving that world behind. She followed David out of the gilded restaurant and into the cool, damp night air of Manhattan. At the curb, a sleek black Rolls-Royce was purring its engine a barely audible hum. It wasn't just a car. It was a vessel from another dimension, a silent, imposing statement of power. David opened the rear door, and Chloe, feeling as though she were stepping into a dream, slid inside. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud and the chaotic symphony of the city. The swans, the horns, the chatter was instantly muted, replaced by an unnerving, profound silence. The interior was cavernous, smelling of rich leather and the subtle clean scent of jasmine. Across from her, illuminated by the soft glow of the cabin lights and the passing street lamps, sat Elara Vance. She looked tired, her face etched with a weariness that hadn't been there in the restaurant. The immense effort of the evening of maintaining her composure, of forcing her mind to reclaim a language held captive by trauma, had clearly taken its toll. She leaned her head back against the plush headrest. Her eyes closed for a long moment. When she opened them, they were fixed on Chloe, and they were filled with a deep, soulful gratitude. The silence Elara began her English quiet, but steady, each word seeming to cost her a small measure of energy. It is a very lonely place, Chloe. For 6 months I have been adrift in it. People either shout at me as if I am a fool, or they speak about me as if I am not there. Tonight, you gave me my voice back, not just by speaking my language, but by hearing what I did not say. Chloe was overwhelmed, twisting her hands in her lap. I don't know what to say, Ms. Vance. I thought I was going to be fired. I was terrified. I grew up in Kyoto. My father was a diplomat, and to hear them the way they spoke to you, the disrespect, I couldn't just stand there. Elara's lips curved into a soft, genuine smile. I know. I saw it in your eyes, long before you approached the table. I saw you flinch when Mr. Thorne shouted. I saw your jaw tighten when Mr. Sterling began his conspiracy. I was watching them, but I was also watching you. She leaned forward, her intensity filling the small space. The accident changed everything for me. It showed me how quickly the world can turn on you. The moment they sense a weakness, the sharks begin to circle. My company, the legacy I have built for 40 years, is vulnerable. I need to find a successor, a partner, someone to protect it. But how can I trust anyone's motives now? Everyone who approaches me sees either a victim to be pitied or an opportunity to be exploited. The world I have found is full of Richards and Marcuses. Chloe listened, captivated, understanding that this was more than just an explanation. It was an unveiling of the woman behind the myth. I find myself in need of a person of rare character. Elara continued, her gaze unwavering. This is not a job offer for a translator. It is an offer for a new path. I need someone on my personal staff who understands nuance, who values integrity over ambition. Someone who can be my eyes and ears, who can sit in a room and see not just what is being said, but what is being felt. I need someone to be my integrity check. She let the words settle, giving Chloe a moment to absorb them. I have a foundation, Elara said, her voice filled with a new passion. The Vance Foundation for Arts and Innovation. It funds 2 things that I believe are the pillars of the future: brilliant female engineers and daring young artists. It is my true legacy. I want you to work with me there, to help me find the next generation of creators and builders, to travel with me, to be my aide, my advisor, and my confidant. She paused again, a shrewd, calculating light, the one that had built an empire, returning to her eyes. I am aware that you are a student. Your education will not be interrupted. It will be underwritten. Your degree at NYU will be paid for in full, as will any graduate studies you wish to pursue anywhere in the world. You will be given a residence in my building, so you will not have to worry about rent, and you will be paid a salary that will ensure you and your family will never have to worry about money again. I am not offering you a job, Chloe. I am offering you a life, a platform, a chance to use your unique gift on a global stage. Chloe's mind was reeling. It was too much, too fast. Her tiny apartment with its leaky faucet, the mountain of student loan debt, the constant grinding anxiety of just trying to survive in the city Elara was offering to wipe it all away with a few sentences. But it was more than that. It was an offer of purpose, of meaning. It was an invitation to step out of the shadows and into the light. The sheer scale of it was terrifying, a leap into an unknown, so vast she couldn't see the other side. "Why me?" Chloe whispered the question born of a lifetime of feeling ordinary. "I'm a waitress, an art student. I'm nobody." Elara reached across the space and for a fleeting moment rested her hand on Chloe's. Her touch was light, but it grounded Chloe in the surreal moment. Do not ever say that Elara said her voice firm, but kind. Richard and Marcus are somebodies. They have titles, reputations, fortunes. They see the world as a spreadsheet of assets and liabilities. They calculate, they leverage, they acquire. But they are blind. You see. You see people. Tonight you saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. That is not a skill you learn, Chloe. It is a fundamental part of who you are. And in my world, a world built on artifice and ambition, that gift is a superpower. I do not need another calculator in my life. I need someone who can see. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, not of sadness or fear, but of a profound, overwhelming sense of being truly seen for the first time in her life. The years of being a quiet observer, of feeling like a ghost in her own life, had not been for nothing. It had all been training for this single moment. She took a deep, shaky breath, the air in the silent car, feeling charged with her future. She looked into Elara Vance's eyes and saw not a millionaire or a tech mogul, but a mentor, a kindred spirit. A new door was opening, and she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that she had to walk through it. "Yes," Chloe said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, Miss Vance, I would be honored." A brilliant, beautiful smile spread across Elara's face. "Elara," she corrected gently. "From now on, you will call me Elara." As she spoke, the car pulled away from the curb, gliding silently into the river of traffic. Chloe looked out the window at the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan, their lights twinkling like a galaxy of earthbound stars. Just an hour ago, she had been a tiny, insignificant speck in that vast, indifferent city. Now, as the Rolls-Royce moved through the night, she felt like she was finally on her way to becoming one of them. The journey was just beginning. What you just heard wasn't just a story about a business deal. It's a story about the masks we wear and the snap judgments we make every single day. It's about how we constantly underestimate the people around us, the quiet colleague in the office, the cashier at the grocery store, the waitress serving our table. We see a uniform, a job title, a silent exterior, and we fill in the rest with our own prejudices. But behind every pair of eyes is a universe of experience, a hidden strength, a voice waiting for the right moment to be heard. Elara Vance wasn't a victim. She was a queen testing her court. And Chloe wasn't just a waitress. She was the only one worthy of entering it. If this story moved you and reminded you of the extraordinary power of ordinary kindness and perception, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories that reveal the incredible truth that heroes are all around us, often in the most unexpected of places. Thank you for listening.